Well, hello, it's been a week and I've read all your comments on my episode 1 and 2 review. Some of you loved the show's start, others hated it, but most seem willing to set aside preconceived notions and give Noah Hawley's vision of Alien a fair chance, despite its flaws. Some issues are hard to ignore, while others may fade as the series progresses. Episode 3, aptly named Metamorphosis, which makes sense considering what is to come in episode 4, could be split into two halves. The second half was full of existential dread, creepy vibes, and a looming sense of suffocation on the horizon for anyone working for Prodigy. Some moments within the first 30 minutes, however, felt disappointing, as the children play scientists in the rapidly deteriorating lab under the strict guidance of Kirsch. Wendy, using her powerful hearing ability, races to track down the xenomorph that kidnapped her brother, Hermit. In fact, her hearing plays a significant role in this episode. As you may recall from the first episode, during her examination, Arthur stated that she could hear beyond human frequencies, specifically at 75 kHz, which is at least 3 times higher than a human range. It's worth noting as well that her examination was never concluded due to Wendy becoming distracted. Therefore, the discomfort she later feels from experiencing such frequencies may be of great interest to Prodigy as the alien research commences. After Wendy discovers her brother, imprisoned with secreted resin inside a shipping container, the scene took a turn for the worse, I felt. Considering that I enjoyed the rest of the episode, this whole sequence fell completely flat for me. On the one hand, we finally have some evidence of the alien behaving in a law-accurate way, cocooning its victims in an effort to spawn more of its kind, instead of adhering to senseless killing. Then again, when the Xeno does appear, he's greeted with the same demoralizing equation that seeks to remove all fear and tension from a sequence by introducing familiar horror tropes and far-fetched action into the scene. As the menacing silhouette appears, whose arrival once significantly elevated our heart rates, it now feels somewhat predictable and uninspiring, in what essentially is just a stare-down, even if the threat is still present. To make matters worse, Wendy uses her blade, which was prized from a paper cutter device, remember? To pierce the shipping container as well as the armoured exoskeleton of the beast. Unsurprisingly, the creature bleeds acid. However, this acid type is vastly more corrosive and fast-acting than anything we have ever seen before, rapidly dissolving a huge hole in the thick layer of cotton steel. Yet the blood that drips onto Hermit's shirt is ineffective, and the paper-cutting blade that is now smothered by the substance somehow survives long enough thanks to the blade's plot armor, so that Wendy can soon make her killing strike. But not before we are privy to something that looks more like an episode of dogs behaving badly. I don't know if every clash between synthetics and Xenos is going to be presented this way, but the fact that Wendy was able to ragdoll the perfect specimen so easily was something I was very concerned about. Meanwhile, the two hybrids tasked with securing the eggs display zero comprehension of the weight and severity of the situation. I realise they're children, but thankfully, just before things get uncomfortably worse, Morrow, who's one of my favourite characters along with Kirsch, saves the rest of the episode by interrupting a delightful and riveting conversation between Smee and Slightly, where I think the word bro was used over 20 times in the space of 1 minute. The good news is that from here on out, the plot thickens and everything gets better. I enjoyed the subtle hint regarding the origin of the eggs when Morrow tells them that they were found on a faraway moon, almost implying Acheron, otherwise known as LV-426, whilst still keeping their location a complete mystery. For Morrow, this is a pivotal moment that sees him learn not only his location on Earth, but what Yutani's most recent rival has been up to. Things become increasingly interesting and complicated for this figure because his sole purpose is now to retrieve the expedition's data and specimen cargo back to his employer. There are two problems, however, escaping with the data being the foremost, and then predicting what kind of reception he will receive from Yutani's current leader, 65 years on. Perhaps he believes he needs a bargaining chip, and informing Yutani of Prodigy's revolutionary breakthrough with hybrids could be just that. After learning that the synthetics with childlike mannerisms believe they have parents, he places a comms device on the neck of Slightly and asks him, when is a machine not a machine? I understand this to mean when it transcends its function, essentially. In other words, when it feels, chooses, or disobeys, perhaps. Regardless, this is obviously some early rapport building with Slightly that may help Morrow complete his task. Despite the eggs now starting to react to the presence of another organic, The most menacing thing of all is when Morrow says to Kirsch, "She won't let you have them," referring of course to the female antagonist who runs Yutani. Whether he means then or now, this simple line foreshadows a heated exchange between these powerful people in the series. I couldn't figure out what was more bizarre about this shot. The fact that the acid blood was still oxidizing and its chemical reaction producing vapors when in the films its potency is short-lived, or the absolute nonchalant attitudes of the security staff as the galaxy's most terrifying lifeform lay just beside them, without even a modest covering. This man is even taking a nap. He is so struck with wonder over the confirmation of deadly alien life out there in the universe, that it must have all gotten a bit overwhelming for him. Now that the episode moves away from the alien encounters, which I don't think they handled too well, into the corporate drama and politics of the lab and office space, I begin to feel my feet sink firmly into the ground once more as the show excels again in what it does best. We get to see the beginnings of these specimens being studied intensively, and I never thought I'd see a facehugger extracted from its protective surroundings with such precision, only to be manhandled or synth-handled into submission. Although Boy Cavalier has the lab on lockdown, with only synthetics granted access in or out, as the camera pans out, you don't need to understand the instincts of a facehugger to see just how many exit strategies suddenly present themselves as the inevitable escape draws closer. As the CEO's right-hand man demonstrates his loyalty and inquisitiveness in certain matters that could harm Prodigy, in this case what information Morrow has gained from these hybrids and their loose lips, that could be weaponized by Yutani. Kirsch stands ominous behind one-way glass, planting the seeds in our imaginations as to what he plans, what he wants, and what he will do. Timothy Oliphant plays his part well. He's calm and measured, yet ominous and quietly unpredictable. A familiar theme is taking shape in this episode, one that is sadly an all too common reality. Despite Boy Cavalier's wealth, power, and influence, his obsessions will undoubtedly be his downfall. His subordinates all have the company and its people's best interest at heart, it would seem, but they're pleased to abandon his rash decision to take what is not his fall on deaf ears. As we know from past experiences, the Xenomorph ultimately cannot be contained, and with a large variety of other species yet to be revealed, this only increases the odds of containment failure. Meanwhile, under the ever-growing shadow of Yutani, perhaps even Weyland Yutani if the year is truly 2120, given their merger in 2099, the corporation looms larger and more suffocating as Prodigy refuses to comply, raising the stakes with every episode. Kicking the inevitable clash off is a very direct conversation between Morrow and Yutani, where we learn more about the measure of Morrow's dedication and loyalty, now more finely tuned than ever, as he expresses there is nothing left for him other than the mission. Yutani's intentions and morals remain unclear. Will she live up to the company's ruthless prioritization of goals over human life, or is there an emotional complexity to this woman that will, in time, reveal a sort of anti-villain rather than a straightforward antagonist? I also found it fascinating when Morrow mentioned to Yutani that the Maginot was sabotaged. I had initially assumed him responsible, but perhaps not. We definitely need a few more flashbacks to fully understand the problems that occurred on board after arriving at Earth. This side of the show is what I'm excited for now, but I sincerely hope they inject some of that old school terror when we next see the Xenomorph. The final scenes with Morrow highlight his quest to break into Neverland facility and take back the specimens, something unimaginably difficult considering the remote destination, security, and the fact that he is a lone operative. Well, he may soon have an inside man, or child should I say, with an open line of dialogue to slightly whenever Morrow chooses. I suspect he'll seek to manipulate his way into the complex with a skeleton key that can walk, talk, and subdue if needed. It's going to get interesting from here, I can feel it. With the Lost Boys' individual strengths and weaknesses beginning to show, ultimately I think it will be Kirsch that binds them together, despite his own cards being held so closely to his chest. Curly seeks respect from Boy and expresses her desire to achieve great things from one child genius to another. Nib seems to be falling apart at the seams in an existential nightmare, one that has her constantly questioning what reality is and if her identity means anything anymore. All of them are slowly becoming more difficult to control as they adjust, and this feels like just the start of their complexities, promising a multi-layered set of issues for company productivity to say the least. As Wendy wakes up, two surgeries are taking place, and both have a connection that is more than just symbolic of sustaining life. At first, when seeing the surgery done to Hermit, I had assumed he might have been face-hugged during his time spent restrained in the container. Otherwise, why, after repairing his internal wounds, would they remove half his lung, I wondered. I was certain that once they placed his lung inside the tank, it must have contained an embryo, and this organ was now being used to facilitate the growth of a chest burster, as I had actually predicted in an earlier theory video about this thing being an artificial womb, a method known as ectogenesis. What we learn from the extraction taking place in the lab parallel to Hermit's surgery is that the crucial component, the xenoorganism or tadpole in this case, is removed and placed in the tank with the lung that is now on life support. I don't know if this feels law-breaking to some, as the facehugger was required to attach itself to a victim for a certain amount of time for the process to complete. You could argue that it was mostly feeding the host oxygen and a sedative to keep the victim alive and stable, while the embryo settles in. But I thought it was a nice touch and addition to the franchise to discover that the xenomorph begins life at this size, within its parent parasitoid. What do you think about it? Its growth is rapid, so it would need to be further along than in the stages of simple fertilization for the creature to increase in size so rapidly. I recall that in the trailers many people suggested it was a bullet that travelled through this tank and into Wendy. Although the speed isn't far off, we now know how the next xenomorph is born. But will it be the one experimented on, or the specimen we see out in the wild? Perhaps we can also assume that Hermit is now officially a cyborg with the addition of an artificial lung. As for Wendy's collapse at the end, to me, it merely signifies her inability to process the high-frequency sounds being emitted from the parasites, rather than any form of psychic ability. I may be proven wrong soon enough, but I don't see what the show has to gain from having a main character who can communicate, or even control the monsters in the story. If this is the case, then I believe we can expect the potency of the perfect organism to be further diminished. If not, then I'm eager to see where this ability, exclusive to her but not the others, will take us. So far, there seems to be something I hate, can live with, or really admire in every episode. What I don't like about the show doesn't detract from the overall excitement I have for what Alien Earth is trying to show us. The concept of consciousness transfer feels so far beyond our current understanding that it doesn't fully resonate with me, unless the show delivers on its promise to explore what it means to become more than human. There were certainly moments that leaned towards this when Boy defined the word prodigy, and the real reason why a child can be a genius. He said children have access to a world of infinite imagination. I'm eager to see how the many alien variations on Earth shape events, how corporate rivalries escalate, possibly into war, and what ruthless executive decisions raise the stakes, leaving a dark path of death in their wake in true alien fashion. Long term, I'm more curious to see how this series will fit into the wider universe, and whether it will tie into particular events from the films. For instance, maybe the moon where they discovered the xenomorph eggs is something worth exploring. As for the downside of the opening episodes, apart from the foreboding Maginot intro, nothing has scared me yet. That may sound odd coming from an adult conditioned by this genre, but plenty of movies and shows since my disciplined childhood of devouring horror films on VHS have still managed to catch me off guard with great timing and execution. I'm almost embarrassed to say that the first Paranormal Activity made me leave the room many a time. It shouldn't be too hard to sustain real tension in each episode, and a few well-placed but meaningful jump scares could give the suspense some much-needed payoff. The problem is that the show's idea of suspense is a full reveal of the monster, in what can only be described as a stare-down between the Xeno and its prey. Having the monster as a static threat to evoke a sense of dread or anticipation of imminent danger, rather than keeping the beast out of sight and in the shadows, where it becomes more frightening, doesn't feel like the right approach. But here I am again making those pointless comparisons to the great original films made decades ago. If I missed anything, let me know in the comments. I believe episode 4 will have to step up the pace now, as it will mark the halfway point in the series, and a lot of moving pieces are about to come into play. Well, those are my thoughts. See you in the next one. Dude, signing off.